Hey everybody, this is Dr. Hathcock, and in this topic, we're going to look at the war in Vietnam. I guess to give some background to all of this, Vietnam was a colony of the French. During World War II, this area was, fighting against the Japanese. It had been conquered actually by the Japanese during World War II. One of the leaders of Vietnam during that fight against the Japanese is the gentleman you see there at the bottom, a fellow named Ho Chi Minh. Ho Chi Minh was a freedom fighter in Vietnam. He helped with the fight against Japan during the war. When World War II came to an end, there was some talk about the possibility of freeing Vietnam. Not just Vietnam, but like just ending France's control over that whole area, Laos, Cambodia, Vietnam. Ho Chi Minh was pushing hard for a free and independent Vietnam. The United States talked real tough at the end of World War II about kind of ending the age of colonialism. But at the end of the day, the United States felt like France was a stronger ally to have than, say, Vietnam. So the French held on to French Indochina at the end of the war. But for Ho Chi Minh, he didn't give up that idea of an independent and free Vietnam. Um, there's a lot of evidence to suggest that he tried to get support from the United States, or what we would call the West, in that fight for freedom. But realizing that the West was more interested in protecting the French than it was in independent Vietnam, he ultimately turned to communists. He turned to the Russians and the Chinese for support. And so his, I guess, war for independence became a fight for communism there in Vietnam itself. And so Ho Chi Minh continues or just wages this war against the French to free Vietnam from that control. There's this big battle that takes place at a place called Dien Bien Phu. You can see there on the outline how you spell Dien Bien Phu. But this big battle in 1954, Ho Chi Minh and his Vietnamese forces, they actually defeat the French in combat. This forces the French to essentially call for peace negotiations, which are held in this thing called the Geneva Peace Accords. With the Geneva Peace Accords, the French agreed to, sort of relinquish their control over Vietnam. But in that, the United States then agreed to step in and support what would come to be called South Vietnam. And if you look on that map over there, it's the purple areas. They're kind of along the water, along the South China Sea. What's in purple there will be South Vietnam. North Vietnam is what's above that in yellow. And so, yeah, with the French pulling out of Vietnam, it falls to the United States to try to stand up for South Vietnam and really just try to carry out that policy of containment that we've spent a lot of time talking about in class. Also, within all that, you have what many were talking about in the 1950s called the domino theory. The domino theory was this idea that if you allow one nation in Asia to fall, then others would soon follow that lead and fall as well. It's kind of like if you have dominoes lined up and you knock that first domino down, then the next one hits the next one, and it just causes a chain reaction of events, right? And before you know it, all the dominoes are down. So the domino theory was this idea that we had to make a stand in Southeast Asia. We couldn't let one nation fall because if one nation falls, then the rest will fall like a stack of dominoes. So with Dien Bien Phu and the French removing themselves from French Indochina, North Vietnam is controlled by Ho Chi Minh and his communist forces. South Vietnam is backed by the United States, and that's really what sets up the war to come from an American perspective for sure. Okay, looking at President Eisenhower and sort of his commitment to Vietnam. President Eisenhower was committed to a democratic South Vietnamese government. The leader of that government is Ngo Dinh Diem. You can see there how to pronounce his name. You can also see him there in a photograph shaking hands with President Eisenhower. Right next to Eisenhower is our Secretary of State, John Foster Dulles, in that photograph as well. So the United States agreed to back South Vietnam with weapons, with support, with things that they would need going forward. We didn't really have a large troop commitment at that point, but we were backing the South Vietnamese government in any way that we could. Then you get to John F. Kennedy's presidency and sort of his role in Vietnam. Kennedy started to implement a policy we call flexible response. And flexible response was kind of playing off of the back of mutually assured destruction, which we've talked about before as well. That idea that future wars would be about, total nuclear response and things like that. Kennedy said that that's not really a way to go forward, that there are some situations that just simply don't call for the use of nuclear weapons. So flexible response was more of a, I don't know, being flexible in how we respond to military situations. Flexible response was big on training highly specialized combat forces like Green Berets. And it was just giving the United States an ability to respond to military situations that didn't just involve the flat out use of nuclear weapons. So flexible response is a big part of our, I don't know what we'll do in Vietnam, specialized forces, Green Berets, things like that. Out of that, under Kennedy, we sent a lot of advisors into Vietnam. You can see there on the bottom of the slide. That's a picture of some Americans there with some South Vietnamese soldiers. And those are American advisors who were over there training the South Vietnamese army how to use weapons, how to fight, basically training them in combat so that they could defend their country if it were ever attacked. Let's see, in November of 1963, a coup broke out in the South Vietnamese government. And Diem was actually assassinated just like a week or so before John F. Kennedy was assassinated in the United States. And so with that, the government in South Vietnam, the coup was led by the military. At that point, the military began to have a little more control over the South Vietnamese government. Also, it's pretty clear after Diem's assassination that the government in South Vietnam really just sort of pinned everything on the Americans. Like the United States will defend us. There's a lot of pretty hard evidence of the South Vietnamese government just embezzling money from the United States, like money that was supposed to go to food or supplies or something like that was just being taken by leaders of the South Vietnamese government. So yeah, it got pretty strange in South Vietnam after that coup and the removal of Diem from power there in November of '63. It's really under Lyndon Johnson that the United States makes a total full commitment to fighting the war in Vietnam. August 1964, there's this incident in the waters kind of off of North Vietnam, an area known as the Gulf of Tonkin, where there's a U.S. ship, I believe it was the USS Maddox. It was a little close to Vietnamese waters. Three North Vietnamese torpedo boats came out to sort of assess the situation, see what the Maddox was up to. At some point in all that, the Maddox fired a warning shot. Other shots were fired. Some American aircraft was sent in to the situation as well. And it was on August the 6th that there was an attack there in the Gulf of Tonkin. Let's see, there was a U.S. ship that was damaged. The three Vietnamese torpedo boats were damaged as well. Several North Vietnamese sailors were killed in that Gulf of Tonkin incident that broke out there on August the 6th, 1964. Now, 2 days later, on August the 4th, there was a claim that another attack had happened, excuse me, there in the Gulf of Tonkin region. But we now know for a fact that that was a fabrication, that was something that the Defense Department, I call it what it is, they flat out lied about it. But with the Gulf of Tonkin incident, this gave President Lyndon Johnson the opportunity to go before the Congress and essentially state that American forces had been attacked, that the United States should get involved in the war in Vietnam. So yeah, with the Gulf of Tonkin incident, we start to see United States forces being used more directly in combat in Vietnam. And as you can see by that chart down there on the bottom left, we're going to start sending a lot of our guys over to fight there in Vietnam. Over 500,000, as you can see, by 1968, Americans are going to be fighting in the war in Vietnam. Let's see. Operation Rolling Thunder was this 3-year-long bombing campaign by the United States Air Force. You see there on the bottom of your slide, there's a B-52 bomber. You can see all those bombs coming out the bottom of it. That other photograph of 4 bombers, and you can kind of see all the bombs dropping out of the bottom of it. With Operation Rolling Thunder, the United States just put the pressure on North Vietnam with this continuous bombing campaign of that part of the world. This was 3 long years of bombing, a lot of casualties. It was very expensive to carry out these raids, the weapons involved, the fuel, and everything. Yeah, but for 3 long years, the United States used Operation Rolling Thunder really as a way of trying to bring the North Vietnamese to like the negotiating table, to try to stop the fighting in Vietnam, and really to just try to get some sort of a peace agreement in place where the South was protected and the war would stop. Yeah, but along the way, the United States really did build up ground forces. You can see starting in 1965, there's a huge commitment on the part of the United States to send more and more soldiers, and it just increases each year. You can see 66, 67, 68. There's a draft here in the United States where it's really based on birth dates. It's crazy stuff. They would televise these things, and the draft board would pull out these numbers. Then they would go over to this board, and it would say, if you were born on whatever date, you were drafted, and you were supposed to report into your recruiting officer and be sent off to basic training and things like that. But along the way, as the war became an extremely unpopular war, a lot of the people who were selected for the draft would, as they call it, dodge the draft. They refused to go to the recruiting stations. Some young men in the country just went off to Canada or Mexico to try to avoid the draft. Also, there was an out for college students at the time that if you were taking college classes and you maintained a high grade point average, then you would not be part of the draft at all. Kind of a side note, I remember a professor of mine at the University of North Texas who was teaching history at that time during the war in Vietnam, and he said that never in his entire teaching career had he ever felt the pressure of grades more in his life. Then like if he said things like, if I gave the student a C for the semester, then that kid could become eligible for the draft because he wasn't maintaining a GPA that he needed. So yeah, there was all that kind of pressure here at home as well. Looking at the government of South Vietnam here, yeah, it really became a corrupt government over time. It didn't really do the heavy lifting necessary to defend its country. It sort of just left it all to the United States to do the heavy lifting and things like that. Also, like I said, there's a lot of evidence of just outright stealing money from the United States, not using those funds for what it was supposed to be used for. So the government in South Vietnam really just didn't show a willingness to, I guess, defend the country, take the necessary steps to, strengthen the nation and prepare it, for combat and things like that. Let's see, looking here for the war at home. Yeah, this war became very unpopular back home in the United States. As more and more young men were being sent off to fight in the jungles of South Vietnam, the anger just intensified as the years went by. And then more and more young men were being killed over there in Vietnam. And there really just was a feeling at home of we don't really have a strategy for winning this war. There was a feeling that those in charge of it all were kind of incompetent and didn't know what they were doing. And there just really was a sense amongst young people in America that they did not want to fight this war. They did not want to be drafted into service. And there were protests that broke out all across the United States against this war in Vietnam. You can see there in the top right-hand side of the slide, these signs, "Bring the troops home now." Yeah, this happened all across the United States. It really also took over pop culture. A lot of musical artists of that time were protesting the war in Vietnam. Actors and Hollywood stars were protesting our involvement in the war in Vietnam as well. Now, one thing that the protesters really hit on was this idea that a lot of these young men we were sending off to fight in Vietnam, they weren't even old enough to vote. In fact, the average age of a combat soldier in Vietnam was 19, and back then you had to be 21 or older to vote. So the 26th Amendment, which is added to the Constitution, lowers the voting age down to 18. And it's kind of the Congress said, well, maybe you boys are right. Maybe we shouldn't be sending men off to fight in Vietnam. They don't even have the right to vote. So we'll lower that voting age down to 18 and, still send these young men off to fight in the jungles of Vietnam. So, yeah, the 26th Amendment is lowering the voting age down to 18. Okay, there's a big moment in all this in early 1968, something we call the Tet Offensive. The Tet Offensive was a surprise attack that broke out across South Vietnam that was carried out by what are called the Viet Cong. The Viet Cong are the North Vietnamese soldiers, they're military. These were communist forces. They had been using sort of roads through Thailand and Cambodia and Laos to make their way into South Vietnam in sort of a surprise way. And you can see here for about a month, this thing called the Tet Offensive broke out from January to February of 1968. What happened on the ground in the fighting is the Viet Cong actually suffered massive casualties in the Tet Offensive. They lost a lot of soldiers. The North Vietnamese did in this thing called the Tet. The Tet was a holiday in Vietnam. It was kind of understood that there wouldn't be any fighting during the Tet. It wasn't officially a ceasefire, but it was kind of understood that the holiday would be respected by both sides. But during this holiday in '68, the North carries out these surprise attacks. It is massive, as you can see on that map down there on the slide. It hit all across South Vietnam all at once. But honestly, U.S. forces held their ground during the Tet Offensive. They fought back. They held those cities, and they gave the North Vietnamese a pretty strong defeat there in the Tet Offensive. But by this point, the United States media really had started to turn on the war in Vietnam. The gentleman who you see there, his name is Walter Cronkite. He was really the most trusted media man in America at the time. And, they talk about it was a big moment when Walter Cronkite in February of 1968 went on the air and basically said to the American people that he did not believe that we would be able to win this war in Vietnam. And the Tet Offensive is what led him to conclude that the United States would not be able to win this Vietnam War. So even though the Tet technically was an American victory, they did defeat the Viet Cong during the Tet Offensive. Public opinion really starts to turn at that point. There really is a sense of we need to get out of Vietnam and we need to pull our forces out and just, and stop this. And definitely by 1968, that's the feeling in America is enough. Stop the fighting, pull our forces out, and really just sort of, let the South Vietnamese do this for themselves instead of having our country, stand up and fight for them. But yeah, there in 1968, that year was pretty intense. I've talked in other lectures about the assassinations in 1968, like Dr. King and Robert F. Kennedy. College students in 1968 were protesting like crazy against the war. This anger and rage against the assassinations that had happened that year. 1968, this country got pretty out of control. And with everything happening, President Johnson decided in 1968 that he would not seek a re-election. So yeah, LBJ's involving us in Vietnam in many ways, it just ate up his presidency. And the public turned on the president. They turned on the war. The media was just hounding our involvement in the war over there. So yeah, everything turned on the Vietnam War in 1968. In 1968, Richard Nixon is elected president of the United States. He'll be sworn in 69. And Nixon's handling of Vietnam is going to prolong the war a few more years. And Nixon had this policy that he called Vietnamization. And Vietnamization was this idea of training the South Vietnamese army to more or less stand up and fight for itself. Vietnamization was kind of like we're going to slowly but surely start pulling our forces out of Vietnam, but while we're making our withdrawal, we're going to kind of hand it all over to the South Vietnamese to defend themselves and stand up for themselves and fight for their own country. So yeah, the Vietnamization policy is training the South, helping the South get ready to fight for itself, stand up for itself, and all the while that that's happening, slowly but surely, American soldiers are going to start withdrawing from the fight there in Vietnam. Within that, in 1972, Nixon really put the pressure on North Vietnam by extending the bombing campaign. We started dropping more bombs in 1972 than we had in previous years throughout the war. And Nixon was doing all this to try to put pressure on the North Vietnamese to come to the negotiating table to more or less, try to sign some sort of a peace accord to stop the war in Vietnam. Nixon was always big on peace with honor. That it wasn't necessarily about winning the war in Vietnam. It was more about America being able to withdraw from the fighting and have her honor still intact, whatever the heck that means. But the in the home front, popular opinion still turned against the war. People were frustrated with the war in Vietnam. They were angry at President Nixon. And one of the protests was happening at Kent State University, which is in Ohio. Where there at the university, a group of students came out to protest our involvement in the war in Vietnam. Some National Guard soldiers were sent to Kent State University to try to stop the protesting. President Nixon himself sent the National Guard there. At some point in it all, the National Guard fired on the protesting students. Four of the kids at Kent State were killed. You can see there in that photograph. It's a very famous photograph. The young woman screaming and crying as there's a, one of her fellow students is lying there dead on the grounds of Kent State University. It really was a big moment in the country where you have the government killing American citizens over the protesting of the war in Vietnam, and yeah, like at that point, public opinion was completely against the war. But after what happened at Kent State, it really was just a feeling of, okay, enough of this madness. We've got to stop. We've got to get out of Vietnam. Another incident that didn't help Nixon's point of view was something called the My Lai massacre. This is a situation that happened in Vietnam where U.S. military basically killed or massacred a village of people, the village of My Lai, there in Vietnam, South Vietnam. Uh, it was carried out by guys on the ground. This wasn't a U.S. Army policy. It wasn't the U.S. Army ordering these guys to do this. They kind of took it upon themselves. But they believed that there were Vietnamese or Viet Cong there in the village of My Lai. They were searching the houses. They were looking for them. They couldn't find them. So at some point, they just believed that the people living in the village were themselves Viet Cong supporters. So yeah, they just carried out this massacre. They killed women, children, men there in the village of My Lai. After it was over with, the military tried to cover it up, tried to hide the fact of what had happened, but at some point the media caught hold of what had happened. It got into the American press, became a major incident in the country. Uh, Men who were involved in the My Lai massacre were made to testify. Some of those people were ultimately court-martialed and sent to jail. And My Lai is just one more step in this process of, okay, this is crazy. There's enough's enough. It's time to pull us out of Vietnam and to be done with this war. So that finally, you can see here in January of 1973, something called the Paris Peace Accords were signed. And with the Paris Peace Accords, It's essentially a case of the fighting's going to come to an end. There is to be sort of a peace between North and South Vietnam. But honestly, after the signing of the Paris Peace Accords, the North Vietnamese really didn't give up the fight. They continued to use, well, they call it the Ho Chi Minh Trail, where they were sort of secretly continuing to smuggle into South Vietnam and carry out all manner of activities. But eventually, in April of 1975, the United States agreed to withdraw its forces. We started to pull out our military. You can see here we've got pictures from what is called the Fall of Saigon. Saigon was the capital of South Vietnam. And as the United States began to pull its troops out, we also began to pull out some of our advisors, people who worked for the State Department and things like that who were there in Saigon. We started to get our people out of there, period. And on the bottom right hand side, you can see there's a helicopter sitting atop the U.S. Embassy there in Saigon. And you see that big line of people. These are people who wanted to go with the Americans to get out of Vietnam and be brought to the United States. Not everybody was evacuated out of Saigon. We couldn't get every one of those people on board those helicopters and get them out of the country. So a lot of those people were left in South Vietnam to more or less fend for themselves. And when the North Vietnamese began to show up, which like as soon as America was out, North Vietnamese tanks began to pull into the capital, Saigon. Man, a lot of those people were rounded up, shot, murdered. They were seen as people who aided and abetted the Americans, and for that they were seen as traitors. And it's just a god awful mess with the fall of Saigon and America completely pulling her involvement out of the Vietnam War. In the aftermath of the war, all of Vietnam became a communist nation. Some historians look at these moments and say, the United States did lose the war in Vietnam, but in making the fight, we did keep the domino theory from playing out. It's kind of a weird argument, but people say that us being there allowed for other areas, like Thailand, for example, to form a democratic nation that was stabilized and could control its situation. So maybe in that sense, it did stop the spread of communism across Southeast Asia. But yeah, the Vietnam War, it's really seen as a defeat for the United States. Also in the aftermath of the war, as a lot of our boys were coming home, combat soldiers returning from Vietnam, they were treated very badly. They were spat upon, cussed at, pushed around, hit. Those guys came home not to a country that maybe was sort of proud of them and gave them medals and parades, but I just I don't know, a little bit upset about losing the war. Many young people in the 1970s, they looked sort of disdainfully upon guys who had gone over there to fight in the war in Vietnam. This last point of the Vietnam syndrome, it's a weird thing. It was kind of like this defeatist attitude in America, like we had lost the war in Vietnam, so we really weren't invincible. We weren't the superpower that we thought that we were. It took a while to get over that Vietnam syndrome, that feeling of defeat. A lot of people say that our involvement in the first Gulf War there in the 1990s, early 1990s, was something that sort of got rid of that feeling, that Vietnam syndrome, if you will. But anyway, that's the war in Vietnam, and yeah, take care.